All right, so who in here is? Oh, I gotta share my screen. Sorry. Who in here is bilingual or multilingual? Okay, Prerna, you are, Aryan, Avanti, Connie, all right, Max, Isabel. Okay, anybody else? Steph. Okay, all right. Um, Dean, what are you? Are you Yiddish or he? I think I remember one of your sisters telling me, but yeah, Hebrew. Okay, yeah. Okay, all right, cool. Well, that's one of the things that we'll talk about later on is how being multilingual, how they found that a lot of that we actually, when we think in different languages, we actually think differently about things. And people who speak multiple languages will sometimes, if they're in certain situations, think in one language, and in other situations, think in a different language. So, um, does does anybody? Let's take a guess. How many languages do you think there are in the world currently? Meaning languages that are like not extinct. All right, 200, 1,000, a lot like it's like 300, 2,000, 500. Okay, nobody's actually really gotten close yet. Okay, 300. Well, think about it, guys. There's something like there. How many countries are there? Like 176 or something like that. 7,000. All right, Avanti, you're pretty close. All right, there are about 6,500 languages in the world. Now we are losing them at a very, very fast rate. Languages are going extinct at something like one language per day, or something like that. And what's crazy is that of the 6,500 languages, 389 of them are spoken by, which is 6% of the languages that we have, are spoken by 94% of the world. So 94% of languages are spoken by 6% of the world, and 6% of languages are spoken by 94% of the world. Anybody know what country has the most languages? Yes. Yeah. India. Yeah. India has 122 official languages. And, anybody who's been to India, like each state has their own language. And so it's like if when you drove into South Carolina, they spoke a different language there. Okay. Each state has their own language, although the two official ones are Hindi and English. For those are the two. Hindi's the official language. Anybody know what is the most spoken language in the world? Yeah, Mandarin. Okay, Mandarin is spoken by 1.1 billion people. Does anybody know what is the second most spoken language in the world? It's not Spanish. Spanish is actually four. Hmm? English. All right. English is the second most because English is the second language for the majority of the world, and English is the language of business. All right, all these things. English, like whenever people learn a second language, it is almost always English, except for Americans, who a lot of us don't even learn second languages, but obviously English is our first language. Anybody know what the third most spoken language is? That's Spanish is four. Yeah, it's they combine it's Hindi and Urdu, okay, what's called Hindustani, okay, which is basically northern India and then Pakistan. All right, so Spanish is 4. Anybody know what 5 is? It's a language that's spoken by a large region of people. Arabic, yeah. Okay. I don't think nobody's gonna guess 6, but anybody want to take a guess? Now, Chinese isn't a language. Okay. French is 10, Portuguese is 9, Russian is 7. As I said, nobody's gonna guess it. The 6th most common language is Malay, which is spoken by the people in the Malaysian Peninsula, Philippines, Indonesia, which is it's a large area of people. It's not a whole lot of landmass, but there are a lot of people who live there. How do I know all this? Because I do a lot of research before I do before I teach stuff. Like this is all stuff that I researched beforehand. And this could have like these some of these stats could have changed. I This is from last year. I don't have a printer at home, and so I wasn't able to print off a new copy of my notes. So I didn't. I'm just using my ones from last year. Usually, when I print off a new copy, I do all new research. But all right, so 7 is Russian, 8 is Bengali, 9 is Portuguese, and then 10 is French. Why is Portuguese? Portugal is tiny and has like the population of like North Carolina. Yeah, because of Brazil. All right, Brazil has 2 times the rest of the world is the rest of 2 times the rest of the world amount of people who speak Portuguese. All right, so I tell you all that just because I think it's very interesting. Hold on one sec. All right, cool. All right, so what is language? All right, language is any sort of thing that conveys meaning, any way in which we communicate. Our spoken words, our gestured words, our written words, any sounds that we make, anything like that, anything that conveys meaning is considered language, including, you know, we got Anthony Bourdain here, who's one of my favorite people in the entire world. If you don't know who he is, he's a travel writer. He was a chef and a travel writer. Committed suicide a couple of years ago. But I have this picture, a big picture framed in my living room. When you walk in my front door, it's just Anthony Bourdain giving you the finger. Um, but yeah, so any sort of gestures or anything like that are considered to be language. Right now, we're going to start off talking about the different parts of language. Now, don't like this is not like why did he say? Nobody's entirely sure why Bourdain committed suicide. It's real like he was a. If anybody, if you have HBO Max, his show Parts Unknown is on HBO Max, which it was on CNN. And if you like travel shows and whatnot, Bourdain was the best. Like he's one of the most empathetic, who's genuinely fascinated in other cultures. He's funny. He's like very raw. Um, but nobody's entirely sure why he committed suicide. He suffered from depression, but um, all right. So we're going to talk about the different like aspects of language, but don't worry, this is not like I'm not Mr. Mercado. We're not going to be diagramming sentences or anything like that. Okay, it's just a lot of this is just kind of terms that you need to know. All right, so phonemes. A phoneme is the smallest distinctive unit of sound within a word. Now, just to be clear, this is different than syllables. All right. Syllables are the way that the word is broken down. How many groups of letters kind of gonna go together? All right. Phonemes are the smallest distinctive unit of sound. So, for instance, like the word chug has two syllables, but it actually has three phonemes. Okay. Ch is a phoneme, is a phoneme, and g is a phoneme. Okay. The word phoneme, right? And I'm never going to ask you, you're not ever going to have to break down a word and figure out what the phonemes in the word are. At least I'm never going to ask you that. I'm not even entirely sure how to break this, how to do these. But like these are like in a dictionary when when you look at the pronunciation of something and they have like these like different lines and whatnot all over the place. Okay, that is breaking it down by the phonemes. Okay, so phonemes would have uh, ni, ma. I think those would be the different phonemes in the word phoneme. I think I'm not entirely sure, but this is like when somebody asks you to like I don't think you all had hooked on phonics when you were growing up, but I did, and that was like a lot of times when people are struggling to learn how to read or how to spell things, and they tell you to write it down phonetically, meaning spell it the way that it sounds. That is spelling it using the phonemes. So, for instance, like the word phoneme, if you spelled it phonetically, would be probably something like that. Okay. Now, what's interesting, we're going to watch a video on this here in a sec, but every language has their own set of phonemes. Every language has their own set of phonemes, and all phonemes, depending on the language that you speak, some phonemes we cannot pronounce. So if you think about like people who speak Chinese and are trying to learn English, a lot of times have a hard time with the L sound, right? Okay, that L sound is a phoneme that does not exist in Chinese, but it exists in English, which is why you sometimes hear people who speak Chinese but learning English, they might say like instead of really, they might say reary. Okay, they pronounce the L phoneme as an R, or the people like in German, the really guttural sound. Or sorry, I meant to say people who speak Mandarin, like Chinese itself, guys. I understand that I said that. Okay, Chinese itself is not a language, but you all know what I mean. Okay, there's Chinese, and then there's Mandarin and Cantonese, but it's all like Chinese is just the Chinese itself is not a language. Okay. Or like in German, there's the vowels that have what are called an umlaut over it, which is like the two dots, and that means that you would pronounce like that O as like an sound. It makes it pronounced O-E. Um, but these phonemes allow for us to be able to distinguish between, and we're able to distinguish between like the D sound and the T sound. So we can distinguish between bad and bat, whereas people who don't speak English may not be able to distinguish between those two sounds. So every language has their own set of phonemes. All right, so we're going to watch a quick video with these are some, we call them weird phonemes from around the world. And while we're watching it, see if you can pronounce these. Some of them are really hard to do.
Sounds that people around the world actually use to speak. Hear these beautiful phonemes. Them out yourself. Find out which one of them is something you say every day in English. Weird sounds in world languages. Not my normal fare, but I'm feeling something light before we get more linguistic tales. Let's go. A row of languages all lined up in Africa have a sound written GB. So when you run across this name of a dance from the Côte d'Ivoire, you might be tempted to go French on it and call it big. But notice that tie on the top is one single sound. To make it, bring your tongue up to the soft palate and make it done. But also close and release your lips during that g for a combo gb sound. Big, big. There's a voiceless form too. In the World Atlas of Language Structures, with its cross-language data on common and uncommon sounds, these are rare enough that they're only in 8% of the language's sample. Can you putter your lips like if you're cold? That's a bilabial trill, phonetically speaking. Don't pat yourself on the back for it, though. A number of languages use poo and boo sounds. But in the far reaches of Brazil, deep in the Amazon, live the Pirahã, a people whose language has stirred up some linguistic controversy. One of its unusual features is a bilabial trilled affricate. To make it, they hold their tongue in position for a T sound against the teeth, then release it with that sputtering lip trill. I see why this sound is rare. This next type of sound might be more familiar to some of you out there, pharyngeals. The pharynx is straight in the back of your mouth, where the nasal cavity connects to the throat, connects to the voice box. If you bring the base, the root of the tongue, way back, the restricted airflow makes the sound. Am I breathing in your ear? This isn't creepy at all. Voice that sound, and it's Do you know which major world language has sounds close to both of these and expects you to tell them apart from nearby glottal h and velar ch? It's Arabic and other Afro-Asiatic languages. And all pharyngeals can be found in only 4% of the languages in that world sample. A Spanish island in the Canaries off the coast of Africa, La Gomera, makes some intriguing noises. Unlike the previous examples, their oddity isn't a sound, it's actually a whole way of speaking using whistles. It's called el silbo, whistle by locals who use high or low frequency, combined with either flows or breaks to communicate both vowels and consonants. The West African that lippy trill in Brazil, pharyngeals in Semitic, so far our rares are clustered in hot zones. But this next rarity is found all around the planet. Prepare your tongue for dental fricatives. You won't really need much practice though, because English has them. Putting the tongue up against the teeth and pushing a stream of airflow around it this way is only done in somewhat over 7% of that world language sample. All right, English.
Right, so that what they're talking about right there, the dental fricative, is the th sound, the th sound. And you know we're used to it, but that's why some people when they're learning English, instead of saying like thing, they'll say like ting, okay? Because that th sound for people who don't speak English is really hard to make. All right, are there any questions about phonemes? Right, morphemes, on the other hand, are the smallest unit in a word that carries meaning in regards to the word. So this can like prefixes, suffixes, main part of the word, whatever that's called. All right. All of those things can, and like how we put those together and how prefixes and suffixes, whatnot, change the meaning of a word are the morphemes. So, like for instance, the word teacher, how many morphemes are in the word teacher? Yeah, two. Okay. Teach is one, to teach is a verb, and then er means to do. So this it makes it a noun, somebody who teaches. Now, people have brought up, what about the word T in teacher? these are not, I mean, they're not syllables because you could have one word, like, does it have meaning to, doesn't it? Yeah, the word tea doesn't have meaning to the word. So the word tea in here, even though it has meaning, it doesn't do any, it doesn't tell us anything about the meaning of the word, so it's not considered to be a morpheme within it. So like, for instance, like disestablishment would be like, even though like establish is one word, but it has three syllables in it. So morphemes are just the words with it, or the words or the parts of the word within the full word that have meaning. If you look at like some German words, Germans have this very interesting thing where they will just combine like three or four words together into like a giant word, okay, that tells you exactly what it is, all right, but it might be like 30 some letters long, all right, and each part of it is like is a different morpheme. Think of morphemes as morphemes have meaning, and meaning and morpheme both start with an M. Okay, all right. Any questions there? Oh, guys, I meant to tell you, we are going to go over synchronous today, but I don't have any asynchronous work for you to do. Okay, so is that cool with everyone? All right, now grammar. Grammar is just the system of rules within a language that allows for us to communicate and understand others. There are two parts of grammar that you need to know. There is what is called semantics, which is how we convey meaning in language, not just in words, but in language in general. And then there is syntax, which is how we structure language to make it make sense. Like, so when we talk about somebody having good grammar, we're talking about the syntax of how they talk. Okay. All right. So semantics. All right. Semantics is just how we convey meaning in language. You know, it could be something like when we talk about, people are like, you know, it's all in the semantics of how you say something. All right. How we can say things without actually saying them, and understanding, like, you know, I say, like, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, like, you understand the semantics of that. So it's just, but semantics in general is just the set of rules in which we derive meaning from language. So it could be prefixes and suffixes and what they mean and how they change the meaning of what you're saying. Or it could be, you know, your ability to understand the sentence, he hit the bat with the bat. Right? If I say that, you're probably going to picture a bat. No, there's no those are the small words are reminders for me for videos that I used to show. Okay. But no, they don't have anything to do with their with anything. You know, your ability to understand, like, the phrase, like, he hit the bat with the bat, right? You can understand that's probably, all right, there's a bat flying around and he hit it with a bat, like Dwight in that episode of The Office. Okay. Whereas somebody else who's learning language might be like, the hell does that mean? All right. Or reading the sentence, he wound the bandage around the wound. Wound and wound are the exact same word. They're spelled the exact same. However, they are pronounced totally differently. So semantics has a lot to do with the context of what we are talking about. So anybody know what those are called? Words that are spelled the same, sometimes said the same, but they mean something different. Yeah, homonyms. Okay. And then, like, also your ability to understand, and this is why I think English is particularly hard in this aspect. You all know English is really hard to learn because we don't really have, like, people who learn as a second language. It's because there aren't really rules in language or in English. Like, we don't, a lot of other languages follow these very strict rules for it. We don't have those. But like understanding the sentence, like they're going over there to get their food. Like somebody who doesn't speak English be like, what the shit was that? Like that was three of the same words in the sentence, but you understand that they're there and there, based on the context of the sentence, means something totally different. Hopefully, you all know the difference between there, and there by this point in your life. Um, Sounds. Different sounds can convey different meanings that we make. It doesn't even have to be talking. Right? If I go like, what does that mean? Yeah, it's like disappointment or like I'm judging you. Or if I say like, are you going to the store to get food? Like by raising the pitch of my voice at the end of the sentence, what meaning does that convey? Yeah, it's a question. And sometimes people just talk like that. Really like seen it with like teenage girls the most, but they my name is what, and it's kind of annoying. Um, okay, and then along with this, like, do you all know what colloquialisms are? Anybody know what colloquialisms are? No. Like the phrase, so all of you, we all live in the South, even though Charlotte's not really the South. Okay, there are probably like more people here from Delaware than there are people living in Delaware. Um, but like the phrase, like "bless your heart." All right, somebody, if you say that to somebody up north, they're like, That's nice." What does "bless your heart" actually mean? Anyone? Doesn't mean remorse. If somebody says like, "Oh God, bless their heart," for Southerners, it's very passive aggressive. Okay, it's essentially a nice Southern way of saying you're an idiot. Okay, but it's very yeah that they're dumb. Okay, or like so when I first, and every language has these. Okay, and every dialect, like people up north say stuff, have phrases like that we may not know what the hell they mean, but they know what it is. But like when I first moved down to North Carolina from Maryland when I was in fourth grade, on like one of the first days of school, the teacher said like, "All right, put everything up." So I put everything on my desk. She's like, "No, Billy, put everything up." I was like, "This is as high as up as it's going to get right now." Okay, what does "put it up" actually mean? Put it away. Okay, which I have always thought was a really stupid phrase. Okay, but Northerners don't realize what that like. I had no idea what "put it up" meant when I moved down to North Carolina. Can anybody think of any other examples of this? Whether it's in English, in like Southern, or if you speak a second language Can you think of any examples from your other language like this?
What about like soda and pop?
Yeah, those would be colloquialisms or regional dialect things. All right. Oh yeah. All right. Sucking your teeth to express disappointment. Like, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Slang can be like, for instance, like, you know, your parents may at some point be like, "Oh, are you going to go hook up with this person?" You're like, "No." Okay. All right. Because hook up to parents, maybe not to your parents, but to my parents, means something different to them than it does now. Okay. There's a joke. Spanish speakers, the straw is different in every country. Okay. All right. Yeah. So semantics, just how we derive language. All right. And then some people say chai and some people say cha. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. That's like a dialectal thing. All right. Cool. All right. Syntax is how we organize sentences, like how we put, like in English, adjectives come before nouns. In Spanish, adjectives come after nouns. In German, if you have a second verb, it goes on the end of the sentence. And I always just use German because I took German in high school. And I haven't spoken it in quite a while, but ich spreche ein kleines bisschen Deutsch. All right. So syntax is just how we basically, when we talk about like using good grammar, that's where we're actually talking about using the correct syntax. All right. Any questions? All this should be pretty easy. All right. Language development. By the time you graduate high school, how many words do you think you know? Not enough. Okay. Not quite a million. Million's a lot of words. Couple thousand, 10,000. Okay, anybody else have a guess? 500,000. By the time you graduate high school, most of us know around 50,000 words. Now, not all of us, some of us have bigger vocabularies than others, but by about age one, you know about 50 words. Okay, age one is when you can really start talking. Know about 50 by, I know I forgot a zero. Okay, by after age two, from age 1 to 2, you go from knowing about 50 words to about 3,000 words just in that year. After age 2, you learn about 3,500 new words per day, all right, or per year. Sorry. Okay. Um, Averaging about 10 new words per day. Now that obviously levels off, but just think about how many new words you have learned in this class alone. And you don't need to know these numbers, okay? But I just find this stuff interesting. You know, by the time you get out of this class, you're gonna have learned somewhere around probably about at least 1,000 new words just from this class. Because just vocabulary alone is about 800 words. And then I bet I use words a lot of the time that aren't vocabulary words that you've never heard before. So, all right, little refresher on the brain and language. Obviously there are more areas of the brain involved, but the two areas that are most involved in language. Wernicke's area in the left temporal lobe. All right, Avanti asks a very good question. If one was to learn a language fluently, can they forget it or can they relearn it easier? Yes, you can. Like, think of storage decay. Okay, if you learn a language, if you're fluent in a language and then you move to another country and you don't use that language, it'll decay. But because it's implicit memory, if you start speaking it again, it'll come back relatively. Like, even though I haven't spoken German in probably about 12 years, if I were to go back to Germany, even though I was never fluent in German, a lot of it would come back to me relatively quickly. Wernicke's area, left temporal lobe, language comprehension. This area is not fully myelinated, meaning the development of myelin sheaths, which help neural communication. But by about 6 months, we have a good amount of myelin in this area, which is why even at 6 months, you can't necessarily talk fluently yet, but 6 months olds can understand what others are saying, even if they can't actually say it yet. And then up in the left frontal lobe, Broca's area. Broca's area is involved in the physical production of speech. This begins to be myelinated at about 1 year, all right, which is when you can start actually speaking in fluent language. There's like an age at which development of new language hinders, right? Yes, we'll talk about that. It's called the critical period. All right, and then just aphasia is the impairment of language. Okay.
And finally, from a
one of the interesting things that they found is that we're the only species that has language in the way that we have it. Other species have language; they just like communicate differently. But what they think is that at some point in the evolutionary tree, when when Homo sapiens kind of split from like chimpanzees, they think that we made some sort of evolutionary decision we gained language at the expense of our short-term memory. Chimps actually have much larger and longer lasting short-term memories than we do, but they don't have fluent language like we do. So we kind of gave up the short-term memory for language. All right, language development. This is pretty straightforward. At about 3 to 4 months, we can start babbling. We all know what babbling is. It's just babies making sounds. What is interesting about it, though, all right, so babbling is called pre-linguistic, meaning it doesn't have a meaning, or at least not to us, it doesn't. And you're going to see here in a second a video of the more language learning you do, no, Avanti, that's not what it just means that like our short-term memory capacity, probably because we have that area of the frontal lobe that's being used by language, our short-term memory capacity is just overall lower. All right. What is interesting about babbling is that babies babble in phonemes that are not part of their native language, meaning babies will use phonemes will use sounds that are not part of their household language. What does that tell us about our brain and language? If babies will babble using phonemes that aren't in the household language. Yeah, Avanti, that's correct. Anybody else? Part of maturation, it is. Yep. Yeah, but it means that our brain is set up to learn any language. It's not like if you're born an American, your brain is set up to learn English. Okay, your brain's set up to learn any language, but the household language starts to take over in other areas. It gets rid of other neural connections for those. What's that process called? Anybody remember? Gets rid of, yeah. It's not habituation. Habituation is when we just kind of block out stuff that we don't really care about. Pruning. Pruning is the process of getting rid of neural connections we don't need. So this is an interesting video. There's a video of these babies are babbling back and forth. They're twins, and it's meaningless, at least to us. But it appears that they are having a conversation, right? And see if you can figure out what you think maybe that they are talking about. All right, so even though that's nonsense, what does it seem like they are talking about? Yeah, Prerna, that is it. That's a good. Prerna says, notice that one of them kept lifting the end of their sentence. Could that mean they're asking a question? Maybe. Okay. But it seems like they're talking about the fact that one of them is missing a sock. Okay. The one kid keeps lifting up his foot. But it's interesting how they've picked up hand gestures, right? One of them's like talk to the hand, okay, which is not a phrase that's used anymore, but a phrase that was popular when I was growing up. All right, around the age of one, from about 1 to 2, they go through what's called the one-word stage, and that's pretty easy to remember. Age 1 word, which is where they can use one word to communicate. Doggy, dada, mama, whatever. Okay. And then around the age of 2, and again, when these are all maturational. So some people develop this later, some people earlier, but we always go through these in the same order, right? Around the age of 2, we go into what's called the 2-word stage, which is where you can use 2 words, and usually it's like verbs and nouns. This is also called telegraphic speech, because it's like back in the olden days when we had to send telegrams, you had to pay per word. So people would take out what are words like but called? Conjunctions? I haven't taken an English class and prepositions. Yeah, okay. All right. We would take out all important or all non-important words. So it's just, and then around after that, they go from 2-word stage to speaking fluent sentences within a couple months. Oh, I just thought of another thing with semantics, and how communication is, the different meanings of stuff. Those of you that are Indian, right? Can anybody explain the head bob that took? I never really understood when I was there. Can anybody explain it? What does it mean?
I've never actually noticed anybody doing it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, like when we like show agreement, we either shake our head or shake our head no. Especially in northern India, if you ask a question in agreement, it's kind of they do this just kind of like well head bob thing, and it's very very confusing for Westerners because we just aren't used to it. But that would be for Indians it means okay. So all right, so let's see, almost done. All right, how do we explain language development? Two theories means agreement. Okay, two theories that you need to know. One of them we kind of already know already, but both of these are correct. They just explain language development at different points. Both of them are correct, though. The first one is B.F. Skinner's theory of language development, which focuses on social learning theory. The idea that how a lot of times we learn through imitation of reinforced behavior. When we see somebody do something or whatnot and they get reinforced for it, we're more likely to imitate it. Skinner is correct on this, that a lot of the language we learn is through imitation, but it's more so as we get older. All right. It's not initial language development, but it's as we get older. So think about like those of you that cuss, right? And you know, you all know by this point that I have a relatively bad mouth. Um, I even in here, I keep it under a little bit under control in here because I don't even know, I don't know how many of y'all's parents are listening or whatnot. Um, but you know, those of you that cuss, think about when you were first learning cuss words. Usually it's like fourth, fifth grade or so. Maybe you're hanging out with an older cousin. That's who, you know, I got a lot of my stuff from him. He was kind of my cousin Kevin was a bit of a bad influence just in that and in other aspects. Um, but think about when when you're hearing you're older and you're looking up these, like, wow, they look so cool cussing like that. But when you're learning how to cuss, think about how like little kids will just like throw like a random cuss word into a sentence where it doesn't make any sense to put it in there. They'd be like, what the shit hack? Like, what? That doesn't mean anything. All right. But you kind of learn through imitation and then and through in that way. This is this is a nurture theory, right? Learning through our environment. The other theory is a guy named very famous psychologist and just linguist and whatnot, guy named Noam Chomsky. I don't know where the name Noam comes from, but I like it. All right. Noam Chomsky's theory is again, this one is also correct. Chomsky's theory helps explain like early language development. It's what is called inborn universal grammar. The nativist theory, which basically says that language is native to humans. And what Chomsky says is that we acquire language too quickly to be learned through imitation. Language develops, like we said, we go from speaking 2 words to full sentences within about 4 or 5 months. We learn that too quickly to be imitating other people. So, what Chomsky hypothesizes is that our brain contains what's called a learning acquisition device, or a learning box in the brain that allows for language development, and therefore makes it that language is inborn and it is universal to humans. All of us have the ability to develop language. We are what we would say predisposed. Avanti, it does. We'll talk about that here in a sec. That's the critical period goes along with Chomsky's theory. Basically, this is the nature portion of language development. Okay. Inborn universal grammar, we are set up at birth to learn language. But what we have found is that language is very much a use it or lose it. That there is a critical period, or at least a sensitive period, in which we need to learn language. So, what they have found is that we have to start learning language by about the age of 5. It is significantly more difficult to learn your first language after the age of 5, because what happens is the neurons start myelinating and they basically shut off. They become inhibitory rather than excitatory. Neurons need to be stimulated to have action. Becomes significantly harder after the age of 5. And I linked this documentary if you want to watch it, but Jeannie is hard evidence of this. Jeannie is the girl that was locked in a room for 10 years from age 3 to 13. When they found her, they tried to teach her language. She never really learned language. She's still alive, but she never learned how to speak because she had missed that critical period. She was 13 when she started learning language. That's too late. And then obviously learning our second language gets harder and harder as we get older. If I were to start learning a language right now, it would be really difficult for me, even for you all. That's why it's really stupid that they don't start teaching you all a second language until at usually high school. Ideally, when would all of us start learning a second language? Yeah, elementary school, preschool. Okay, the earlier the better. Those of you that speak multiple languages or fluent in multiple, do you remember actually learning either of them? No, because a lot of times if you speak one language at home and one language at school, they develop parallel to one another. And it's natural. The brain is just set up that way. But now for you all 14, 15, 16 years old trying to learn a new language, your brain's not set up for it anymore. And so you're sitting there being like, repeating after your Spanish teacher. And that's not a good way to learn a language. Think about the best way to learn a language is to be immersed in the language, right? And, people learn languages much faster when they're immersed in it. You learn English from kids shows. Okay, all right, cool. Is it just you have to learn a language generally at that, or just learn some language to develop the scores in it? Yeah, like you have to at least have your first language by age 5. And then after that, like you can still learn a language after that, but it just gets harder and harder because the brain starts to specialize a lot more. All right, so to finish, some languages that are harder to learn than others, especially the second languages, yes. English is considered to be extremely hard to learn as a second language because there aren't rules for it. I'm not sure of other ones. Um, I tried to take French in college. First language develops naturally as long as you learn it by a certain age. All right, so to finish up, we'll watch a little video. Um, this is an interview with Noam Chomsky. We're going to skip that. Done by, has anybody ever heard of Ali G? What about Sacha Baron Cohen, the actor? All right, the guy who plays Borat. Okay. All right. He had a show on HBO in the early 2000s called the Ali G Show that he basically played a character. He was like this like wannabe gangster from London, and but it was like an interview show, and he would interview people, and they would not realize that it was a joke and that he was like trolling them the whole time. They thought it was for real. And in one of them, he interviews Noam Chomsky about language. So some of you will find this funny, some of you won't. I find it humorous. I am going to have to